Welcome to Within the Frame, where we're joined by experts to discuss the most up-to-date issues from across the globe. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. In one of the bloodiest attacks since the beginning of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict, Hezbollah fired attack drones on an army base in Israel on Sunday, killing 4 Israeli soldiers and injuring more than 60 people. The Iran-backed militant group says that the attack was in response to Israeli strikes in Lebanon held Thursday, which took the lives of 22 people. More than 1,500 people have been killed and more than 8,000 injured in Lebanon since September 16, when Israel stepped up its campaign against Hezbollah. International organizations have been expressing deep concern, urging the two sides to stop the escalation of conflict. So what exactly do the two sides want out of this conflict, and what are the implications for possible peace negotiations? For answers to this, we connect to Baek Seung-hoon, researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies. Good evening, Mr. Baek.
Good evening.
And we're also joined by Austin J. Nupe, assistant professor of political science at Utah State University. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Great to have you both. Now let's start the discussion with Mr. Baek. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has now surpassed a year already. Can you provide an assessment of the current situation in the Middle East? How severe is it?
So the U.S. is sending the battery to Israel, along with the U.S. troop to operate it. So this decision was made by Pentagon just a few hours after Iran warned the U.S. to keep its military forces out of Israel. And Israel is also widely believed to be preparing a military response to Iran's October 1st attack, which Iran fired roughly 180 ballistic missiles into Israel. So there are speculation that Israel will target nuclear facility or oil refineries of Iran. So Israel has been escalating its campaign against Hezbollah with waves of heavy airstrike across Lebanon and a ground invasion at the border after a year of exchange of fire with each other. But the problem is attack of Israel become more bold and uncategorical. So it had recently attacked PKO, the peacekeeping operation forces of UN and NGO like Blue Helmet. So that is, Israel is now at two-front war with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Israel offensive in Gaza has killed at least 42,227 people, including 16,765 children, children and more than 98,464 people injured and more than 10,000 people missing. So, and in Gaza, 80% of commercial facilities and 87% of school buildings and 17 of 36 hospitals are particularly functional, and other 19 is out of service. So, and 68% of road networks and 68% of cropland are destroyed. So, in Lebanon, death toll has passed 2,300. So, but one thing is for sure, if the full-scale war happens between Israel and Hezbollah, it won't be one-side warfare as it had been between Israel and Hamas. So early morning today, I mean, in local time on Sunday, 4 soldiers were killed, as you have said it, and in Hezbollah drone attack on army base next to Binyamin city. And IDF confirmed the strike on Sunday evening killed 4 and severely injured 7 soldiers, and total of 60 people are injured. So it is the deadliest Hezbollah strike since Israel launched its ground invasion of Lebanon on 30th of September. So, but once a ground war is in full swing on both sides, it won't be proceeded as Israel Defense Force had planned for. So it is what is going on in Lebanon right now.
Right. Thank you for the summary. It sounds very serious. Now, turning to Professor Nupe, Israel had warned of retaliation against potential ballistic missile strikes from Iran. Reports indicate that President Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu have been coordinating on the level of response. What's Israel's likely threshold for retaliation, especially concerning airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually are not entirely sure, which makes the risk of escalation all the more concerning. Reports from the United States suggest that the Biden administration has set a red line at attacking Iran's nuclear infrastructure. And it's unclear as to whether or not the Israelis can unilaterally affect Iran's nuclear program through a preemptive strike. A lot of the facilities, especially the military component of the program, are hardened against attack. And it would be very, very difficult in a preemptive strike to significantly degrade or destroy Iran's nuclear capability. At the same time, initially, weeks ago, there was a suggestion that a combination of Israeli or American forces would attack Iranian energy infrastructure. The problem is that Iran could retaliate and attack Saudi or other Gulf energy infrastructure as well, both petroleum and natural gas. And so that would lead to a retaliatory strike, would increase global energy prices, would create more chaos in the Persian Gulf. We saw recently a subtle but significant strike by Israel on Iranian assets in the Syrian embassy, at the Syrian consulate outside of Damascus. And so it could be that the Israelis are sending a signal to Iran, a retaliatory signal in an effort not to escalate, but to respond to the initial missile salvo previously. But we're not entirely sure. We're not entirely sure whether or not the Netanyahu coalition or the national security element of his government would brief the United States prior to an attack. There's good reason to suggest that they would preemptively attack without letting the Americans know. Which would be a major escalatory step and would really limit the Americans' ability to de-escalate the tensions there as well.
Right. But in the case of Iran, it has warned that if Israeli strikes target its nuclear facilities, it may consider changing its nuclear strategy. Professor,
Sure.
What do they mean by this? What would be the regional impact of such a shift in Iran's nuclear policy?
Right, so one could imagine in the aftermath of an Israeli attack, let's say they partially destroy Iran's nuclear capability. You can destroy the physical infrastructure. You cannot destroy or eliminate the engineering know-how or the expertise, the knowledge institutions it takes to develop a program. So it would not be surprising in the aftermath of an attack in the following 2, 3, 5 years for Iran to reconstruct those facilities under mountains in the Iranian countryside, where they would harden it against further attack. Right now, a lot of the military assets are already hardened against preemptive attack. So they would further protect those assets, much as what we see in North Korea, actually, where the Iranians recognize that their nuclear weapons program is the best life insurance against foreign-imposed regime change. They view that as an existential threat to the regime because it prevents foreign attack or a foreign decapitation strike. And so it wouldn't be surprising for them to reconstruct those facilities, harden them against attack, receive a significant engineering consultation and help from Russia, if not China. And it would further create instability. What we would see in the aftermath then is the Americans could very well supply Saudi Arabia with a civilian nuclear program in an effort to decrease the time it would take for Saudis to build the bomb, what we call breakout capacity. They could have a civilian peaceful nuclear energy program that then to counter Iran, and that would be the first stages of a more severe regional arms race in the Gulf.
Okay. Now, we cannot, at this point, we cannot help but ask, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel will push through with the conflict until its objectives are achieved. Now, Mr. Peck, what are Israel's ultimate goals in this ongoing war?
The overarching objectives of Israel military at this juncture is to neutralize Hezbollah, which has constituted the most imminent threat to the state of Israel due to its geographical proximity and formidable military capabilities. So on 23rd September, Israel Military Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared the Operation Arrow to the North a significant bombing campaign in Lebanon and stated that the objective was to destroy what Hezbollah has built up over 20 years. So the destruction of Hezbollah represents a significant achievement in the regional hegemonic competition with Iran. But nevertheless, it remains uncertain whether Israel will succeed in achieving its objective, given that Lebanon is not a territory that can be occupied or isolated in the same manner as Gaza. So as we have witnessed how Hezbollah become a strong organization during the 1985 to 2000 occupation, on Israel occupation of Lebanese territory could lead to an increase of Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon, including more sophisticated Iranian support. So we are not sure how the so-called like neutralizing Hezbollah will gonna lead to. So and a lot of experts are kind of like having a skeptical on Israel cannot demolish the Hezbollah influences in the region. So that is the biggest the question mark that we have. But Israel, they just declare that they're going to push it to the end. But including me, some of the experts are thinking that they're pushing it to as far as they could. So when the presidential elections of United States are decided, you know, they're going to have a higher position when they're doing a peace negotiation with Hezbollah and Iran. But one thing is clear, that there will be no peace negotiation with the Hamas. I mean, like what they have proclaimed in the beginning of the warfare. I mean, Israel is pushing themselves to end Hamas, so they could. There will be no Hamas in the post-war era.
Right. So a very straightforward goal that you mentioned. Some analysts suggest that the current ground battle would ultimately hinder Israel's strategic position. Mr. Peck, what are your thoughts on this? Specifically, how might the rebuilding of Hezbollah's command structure and guerrilla tactics affect Israel's military power?
So the Israel military aim is to disrupt the axis of resistance by destroying Hamas and weaken the Hezbollah. The idea is that by breaking down the Iranian proxy coalition, the mastermind who attach its string on its proxy, which is Iran, will also be dealt a fatal blow. However, the chance of a complete collapse of the axis of resistance are highly unlikely. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are too deeply embedded in their communities, and it could not be easily wiped out. So just think about a war on terror with Al-Qaeda. Does the agent who commit terror has gone for good? Who is ruling Afghanistan now? I mean, even if they collapse, appalling tragedy that embedded to Palestinians and Lebanese citizens will haunt them and revive as new agent of terror, like as when PLO become moderate, Hamas has emerged. Many Middle East analysis, including me, analysis that analyzes that the longer the war goes on, the less favorable the outcome for Israel. It could end up fighting a war of attrition against the hard-to-destroy axis of resistance, failing to achieve its objective and wasting its energy. I mean, Hezbollah has shown its enormous capability of resilience when Hezbollah's secretive military commander, Mustafa Baradin, described in the court record as an untraceable ghost, was killed in 2016. He was nicknamed Dhur al-Fikr, referring to the legendary sword of the Ali, the fourth caliph after the Prophet Muhammad. Because he was a legendary army general of Hezbollah, every media analyzed Hezbollah has weakened. But we have witnessed his substitute has risen, like Fuad Shukr, Ali Karaki, Ibrahim Akil. So, I mean, Hezbollah, they've been showing their resilience of like, keep a new figurehead coming up. So, like Israel, in short term, we are seeing that they are winning the war, but like in a short term. But if we analyze in the midterm or long term, we don't know. I mean, like Hezbollah have shown their resilience, so it is not like Israel could end this war with absolute victory.
Right. Now, with the escalating conflict, the effectiveness of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 in resolving the conflict has come into question. So, Professor Nabi, can you explain what this resolution entails and what are the key factors that would enable it to function more effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the UN Security Council resolution came into effect in the late 1970s, about 5 years into the beginning of Lebanon's civil war. Of course, that was an internal conflict that, because it involved Palestinian paramilitary groups, it eventually involved the Israeli invasion of Lebanon just a few years into that peacekeeping mission. So what we've seen over the past approximately 40 years is a modest peacekeeping force along the border between South Lebanon and Israel, something called the Blue Line, which is the peacekeeping border between both states. It involves between 200 and 300 peacekeepers, about 4 dozen different installations. And as is the case with most UN peacekeeping operations, their mandate and rules of engagement are premised on neutrality. So they're there to protect the civilian population, but not to affect the balance of power, the balance of forces in South Lebanon. The problem is there are severely given the escalation of conflict.
Right.
So they're much like the civilians in South Lebanon. They're stuck in the middle of a conflict.
Right. Professor Nabi,
Yeah.
hello?
So what we see. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
We had some network disruptions. Can you continue?
Yeah. So what we see is the inadvertent injuring or attacks on UN peacekeeping forces. The UN peacekeepers are ineffective in their mission to protect civilians and discriminate between Lebanese civilians on the one hand and Hezbollah militants on the other. And so they're they don't have enough capability to actually fulfill their mission. They're understaffed, and as we saw over the weekend, they are also the victim of indiscriminate violence from the IDF. So it's a real they unfortunately are a really ineffective force at this time to prevent further escalation in the Israeli ground war into South Lebanon.
Right. Now let's touch upon the civilians. Mr. Peck, how have public sentiments in both Israel and Palestine evolved during this prolonged conflict? And most importantly, what are the implications for future peace negotiations?
In recent years, the Israel public sentiment has been characterized by increased polarization. On one hand, a substantial portion of the population remains skeptical of Palestinian leadership, particularly Hamas, which governs Gaza. On the other hand, some progressive faction in Israel society still advocate for dialogue and a two-state solution. But the growing influence of right-wing political parties, particularly since the 2009 election of Benjamin Netanyahu, reflects a strong preference for a security-first approach and skepticism of territorial concessions. And with recent conflict, majority of Israel, whether they like the Netanyahu's leadership or not, have lost their faith on Hamas. So it won't be easy for Israel citizens to talk on Israel-Palestine peace process as Hamas being its counterpart. So that's why the current government are, in full leash to get rid of like Hamas without any, grudge feeling. And for Palestinian side, over the past 2 decades, the split between the PA, the Fatah government governing the West Bank, and Hamas, which is controlling Gaza, has further complicated the Palestinian public opinions. While the Fatah PA has maintained a more moderate approach, advocating for diplomacy, Hamas has gained significant support due to its opposition to Israel and its defiance during the conflicts such as the war in Gaza in 2008, 2014, 2021. So the ongoing blockade of Gaza, coupled with economic hardship, has radicalized public sentiment in region, with many Palestinians feeling that peace negotiations have failed to bring meaningful change. So even if Hamas is gone and Gaza needs a group who could mandate its peace talk with Israel, but with its trauma of like Palestinians and Israel aggression they had faced, no one could tell that moderate group could make Gaza Palestinians satisfied during the negotiation with Israel. So as both sides has big scar, the peace process will go through very rocky and winding paths. So I mean, like it won't be an easy task because in near future. So I think it needs some time to progress.
Right, so we're expecting a rocky road ahead. Then at this point, what role does international diplomacy play in this conflict? Are there any significant players or upcoming events that could influence the situation, Professor Nabi?
I think the biggest significant international event affecting the crisis is the American election in 3 weeks. And so my sense is that the Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular is waiting to see the result of the U.S. election. In the event that Vice President Harris ascends to the presidency, we can expect a very similar diplomatic approach to Biden, which I think would frustrate the coalition's relationship with the United States. You'd see very similar dynamics, I would suspect, to what you saw in the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and former President Barack Obama, where there was a visible disdain and disgust from Netanyahu to the American president, premised on Obama's inexperience in the region. And so that's what we would expect with the Harris administration. It's hard to tell right now on the campaign trail. She's not signaling much of a difference with respect to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. I think she can't afford to do that because she's running as an incumbent. She can't afford to be on the campaign trail criticizing the current president. On the other hand, if we see a second Trump administration, there's a lot more uncertainty. Obviously, there's a personal affinity between former President Trump and Netanyahu on the one hand, where you saw a progression of the Abraham Accords, this alliance network, this diplomatic network between Israel and the Gulf states, as well as states in North Africa. So on the one hand, you may see an effort to recharge the Abraham Accords. On the other, we know that former President Trump is unpredictable and temperamental. Mm-hmm. And if he suspects that he's being conned or mistreated by Netanyahu, you could see a real change in U.S. policy vis-a-vis Tel Aviv. And so I think that's a greater source of uncertainty with respect to the future. The Americans have a role to play, but right now they're being very ineffective managing regional tensions, especially with key allies like Jordan.
Right. So the U.S. elections would definitely play a big role in the direction of the conflict. I'm afraid we'll have to cut it right here. We're running out of time. Thank you so much for your insights, gentlemen. Let's hope the situation would at least cool down as peacefully as possible. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.